what if a virus could, like, reshape your life? Not, by killing you, but by, like, twisting your body into these agonizing postures. We're talking about chikungunya.
Yeah, the name itself, that which bends up, I mean,
Mm.
that really captures the essence of this disease.
So, ready for a deep dive.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the story begins in 1952 in Tanzania. Small village, people suddenly start getting hit with this mysterious illness. High fever, rash, and then bam! Intense joint pain, like the worst you can imagine.
I mean, it's no wonder they named it that which bends up in the Makonde language.
Makes sense.
It was really more than just a name. It reflected the suffering.
Absolutely.
Researchers at the East Africa Virus Research Institute, they isolated this new virus, and that's really how chikungunya was born.
But for decades, the world kind of ignored it, right?
Yeah, it kind of flew under the radar for a while. Surveillance, especially in less developed areas, was limited, and a lot of cases were very mild or even without any symptoms, so it was spreading silently.
Like a secret agent.
Exactly, but then things changed pretty dramatically in the early 2000s.
Okay.
A mutation in the virus occurred, and this tiny change, it allowed the virus to infect a new species of mosquito, Aedes albopictus.
So a new mosquito. What's
Oh.
a big deal about that?
Well, it was a game changer.
Okay.
Aedes albopictus, it's way more widespread than the original mosquito that carried chikungunya, and it can thrive in cooler climates.
So it's not just a tropical disease anymore.
Right, exactly. And so this adaptation, it supercharged the spread of chikungunya, and it hit the Indian Ocean, especially Reunion Island, really hard.
Yeah, I was reading about that. Over 200,000 people infected.
Yeah.
Almost a third of the island's population. In just 2 years.
Yeah, it was a public health nightmare.
I bet.
Suddenly, the world woke up to this threat. Scientists were racing to try and understand this new enemy using these cutting-edge tools like genomic sequencing to track its every move.
Okay, so now let's put ourselves in the shoes of a doctor during this outbreak. You have a patient, all the classic chikungunya symptoms.
Right.
What do you do?
Well, unfortunately, back then, there wasn't a lot you could do. There were no specific antiviral drugs available for chikungunya. Treatment was really all about managing the symptoms.
So like putting out a fire with a garden hose.
Pretty much, yeah. Rest, fluids, painkillers, trying to ease the fever and joint pain. But for a lot of patients, the pain was relentless and recovery very, very slow.
But even with doctors battling this on the front lines, researchers were racing to develop better tools, right?
Absolutely. They knew that early detection was absolutely key to controlling outbreaks. So they developed these rapid diagnostic tests, like the real-time PCR test. This allowed them to quickly identify chikungunya and differentiate it from, similar diseases like dengue fever.
Which had always been a problem.
Yeah, always a problem.
Okay, but knowing is only half the battle. What about treating this pain?
Well, that was a major challenge. But this is where it gets really interesting. Doctors started to look to other areas of medicine for solutions. They began using medications typically prescribed for rheumatoid arthritis, called DARDs.
BMARDs.
Yeah, to try and manage the inflammation and the long-term joint pain.
So they repurposed existing drugs to fight this new enemy.
Exactly. It was a little bit of medical improvisation, but it actually showed some promising results for some patients.
Okay, but treating people after they get sick is only one part of this whole puzzle.
Right. Preventing the spread of chikungunya became a huge focus for public health officials. They launched these massive education campaigns to teach people about mosquito breeding sites and encourage people to use insect repellents, emphasizing early detection, trying to break the chain of transmission.
And that's where those rapid diagnostic tests really came in handy.
Huge. The sooner you identify a case, the faster you can isolate the infected person and implement mosquito control measures.
Right, to contain the spread.
Yeah.
So we have this virus spreading like wildfire. It's causing debilitating pain, and we're just starting to figure out how to fight back. But the story doesn't end there, right?
No, it doesn't. In fact, this is where chikungunya really starts to test the global health system.
Because it doesn't stay confined to the Indian Ocean.
Nope. Remember that new mosquito, Aedes albopictus?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it had global ambitions, and chikungunya was its ticket to ride. So in 2013, chikungunya landed in the Caribbean.
Oh, boy.
And it was like throwing a match on dry tinder.
Because the conditions were just perfect for those Aedes albopictus mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah. Warm weather, tons of breeding sites, dense populations. It just spread like wildfire through the islands.
But the Caribbean wasn't ready for this, right?
No, a lot of the healthcare systems were already really strained. They were dealing with other health challenges, so this just added fuel to the fire. A lot of doctors, they weren't familiar with chikungunya. There was a steep learning curve figuring out how to diagnose and manage it.
So they're scrambling to catch up while people are suffering.
Yeah, exactly. But the impact went way beyond those first few weeks or months of the outbreak. Remember we talked about the long-term consequences?
The chronic joint pain.
Yeah.
That can last for years.
Yeah. That's right. That chronic pain became a major burden in the Caribbean and later in Central and South America. People couldn't work, they were struggling with everyday activities, healthcare systems were overwhelmed with this new wave of chronic illness.
It's just wild how one tiny virus can have this massive ripple effect on entire communities.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, health, economics, social well-being, but it also shows the incredible resilience of people. Even with all this hardship, they adapted, they found ways to cope.
And researchers didn't give up either. They kept pushing to find better solutions.
Oh, absolutely. They were driven by how urgent the situation was. They knew they needed better treatments, more effective ways to prevent it from spreading, and ultimately, a vaccine.
To protect people from this awful disease. So the race was on to find a chikungunya vaccine. But that's not easy, right?
No, it's not. Vaccine development is a long and complex process. It takes years of research, tons of trials, huge investments, but the stakes were high. So researchers around the world, they were committed to finding a solution.
Sounds like a real scientific detective story.
It was. They had to decode the virus's secrets, understand how it worked with the human immune system, and then figure out how to design a vaccine that could train the body to fight off the infection safely and effectively.
It did they.
They did. It took years, a ton of dedicated effort, but in 2023, they finally had a breakthrough.
The chikungunya vaccine was finally approved.
Yeah, the VLA1553 vaccine. It's a live attenuated vaccine, which basically means it uses a weakened version of the virus to trigger an immune response, but it doesn't actually cause the disease.
So it's like a practice run for your immune system.
Exactly. And the clinical trials showed it was incredibly effective, like almost 100% protection against the virus. It was a huge achievement, especially for the communities that had been hit the hardest.
I can only imagine the relief.
Oh, yeah. It was a beacon of hope. But it also highlighted some persistent challenges in global health. Getting that vaccine to everyone who needed it, ensuring access, especially in those low-income countries where chikungunya is endemic, that was and still is a major hurdle.
So even with a miracle cure, the battle isn't over.
No, not at all. The fight against infectious diseases, it's a constant arms race. Viruses evolve, mosquitoes adapt, and human behavior plays a big part in all of this.
So for our listeners, what's the takeaway? What should they remember about chikungunya?
Well, first, it reminds us that the world is a very small place. A virus that emerges in some remote village in Africa can quickly become a global threat.
And we need to be prepared for those threats.
Absolutely. We need to invest in research and public health systems and work together internationally. But it's not just about governments and institutions. Individuals have a role to play too.
Like, what can we do on a personal level?
Simple things. Get rid of mosquito breeding sites around your home. Use insect repellent. And if you think you have any symptoms of a mosquito-borne illness, go see a doctor right away.
Sounds like knowledge is our best defense. The more we understand, the better equipped we are to fight back.
Absolutely. And that's why we're doing this deep dive, right? To give you the knowledge you need.
To navigate this wild world of infectious diseases. But the story of chikungunya isn't over, is it? It's still out there, evolving. So what does the future hold?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is climate change. As temperatures rise and weather patterns shift, we're seeing mosquitoes expand their range. That means diseases like chikungunya could reach new populations.
So climate change is giving these viruses a bigger stage to play on.
Exactly, and that is a scary thought. But it also gives us an opportunity. If we can understand how climate change is impacting disease transmission, then we can come up with better prevention and control strategies.
Lots to think about. But before we get too overwhelmed, let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about the science and public health, but what about the human side of this story? What was it like for those people on the front lines actually dealing with these outbreaks, as they were happening?
Yeah, that's an important perspective. Let's hear from the doctors and nurses who were battling chikungunya in the trenches, before the vaccine, when they were trying to figure this all out with limited resources.
All right, so let's shift gears a bit here. We've talked about all the science, the spread, the vaccine. But what about the human impact? What was it actually like for people facing chikungunya before we had any way to really defend against it?
Yeah, It was a totally different world. Imagine, you're a doctor in a rural clinic somewhere in India, early 2000s, and suddenly your clinic is just flooded with patients, all with this same excruciating joint pain.
And chikungunya wasn't even really on most doctors' radar yet, right?
No, a lot of them mistook it for dengue fever,
Yeah,
which was a lot more common at the time. They both have, similar symptoms at first, fever, rash, but chikungunya, that joint pain, it's just relentless.
it's brutal.
It is.
But back then, without those lab tests, it must have been almost impossible to tell them apart.
Yeah, it was. And that meant that treatment was basically a guessing game. There were no antiviral drugs specifically for chikungunya at that time. So all doctors could do was offer supportive care, rest, fluids, painkillers, just trying to help people get through it.
Just ease the pain.
Yeah, exactly.
While the virus does its thing.
Yeah.
I bet that was so frustrating for both the doctors and the patients.
Oh, yeah, it was. It was a feeling of helplessness. But this period also marked a turning point in how the medical community understood chikungunya. They started to realize this wasn't just a temporary thing. The chronic joint pain, the arthritis, it was becoming a long-term problem for so many people.
So it went from being a short-term crisis to a chronic health burden.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine having that kind of pain for months, even years. Basic things become impossible. People can't work. Their quality of life just plummets. It's really rough, especially in places where healthcare is already hard to come by.
So how did they start to address this chronic phase? It seems like uncharted territory.
Well, doctors had to get creative. They started looking at what was being done in other areas of medicine and adapted treatments used for rheumatoid arthritis.
Okay.
Specifically, they started using DARNs, disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs.
DDINs, for those of us who don't have a medical degree, what does those even do?
Okay, so think of it this way. With rheumatoid arthritis, your immune system is basically attacking your own joints. That causes all the inflammation and damage.
Oh.
DMARDs, they work by calming down that immune response, reducing inflammation, and slowing down how the disease progresses.
So it reins in the body's attack on itself.
Exactly. But would it work for chikungunya arthritis?
Right.
Well, it wasn't a perfect solution, but for some patients, it provided some relief. And along with the DMARDs, doctors also started really emphasizing physical therapy to help people regain strength and mobility in their joints.
So managing this chronic pain, it really took a team effort.
It did. Doctors, therapists, the patients themselves. But let's not forget about public health. While all this was happening, they were also trying to stop the virus from spreading in the first place.
Right, because once it took hold in a community, it was almost impossible to stop.
Pretty much. Prevention was key. They had these huge campaigns to teach people about how it spreads, how to get rid of mosquito breeding grounds, to use insect repellent, and to get medical help as soon as they had symptoms.
It's amazing how those simple things can make such a big difference.
They really do. But we also can't forget about how important those scientific advancements were. Remember those rapid diagnostic tests we talked about? Those were game changers. Being able to quickly identify cases meant they could isolate people faster and target mosquito control more effectively.
So we've come full circle now. We've seen chikungunya emerge, spread across the world, challenge our healthcare systems, and ultimately inspire some amazing scientific progress.
What's the message here? What should people take away from all of this?
I think it really highlights how interconnected our world is. Something that starts as a local outbreak can quickly become a global issue, impacting everything, our health, economics, everything.
So we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Invest in research in public health. Exactly, and we need to work together globally. But it's not just about governments and big institutions. Individuals, we all have a role to play.
So to our listeners out there, what's the one thing you want them to remember about chikungunya?
Chikungunya is a serious virus. It may cause lasting health problems, but we are learning to fight back. We have the vaccine now, those rapid diagnostic tests, and research is going on all the time to find new treatments. So stay informed, be proactive, and know that we're in this together.
It's been a fascinating deep dive and a really important reminder that knowledge really is our best defense. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.